Chapter 27. Things were still a little foggy and her brain felt like someone had poured molasses in it, making the gears slow and sticky, but Steph could think again. She wasn't sure if it was getting better or worse, but for now, she had no choice but to go with it. Noah said that they needed to talk to the guy that had come in while they were dressing, so she went to the living room. The last thing she expected was to find a man in a black Tucson Police Department uniform, sitting on the couch, looking through the photos in the box. "Dude, have you become a stalker or something?" the man asked without looking up. "No, those would be why I called you," Noah said behind her. He put his hand on the small of her back and guided her to a chair. "You want to sit in the chair and brush out your hair, or do you want to sit on the floor and let me do it?" "I can." She took the brush from him and sat, curling one leg beneath her. "You're her," the other guy said. "Brilliant," Noah said, drawing Steph's attention to him. He stood next to her chair, and she got the impression he was staying close to her. "Where did these come from?" Noah checked his watch. "About 6 hours ago now." The officer, Steph couldn't remember what Noah had called him, frowned. "Why did you wait so long to call?" "We didn't open it until about 10 or 15 minutes before I called you." Noah sighed. "Let me start from the beginning." The officer set the photos back in the box and scooted back on the sofa to listen. "This is Steph." Noah's hand touched her back. She waved one hand, then went back to working the tangles out of her hair. "I met her when I went up to Pelican Lake with Tate." "And she came back with you?" "Wow." "No. She's a student at U of A, but that's beside the point. I met her when she found a note on her car. I helped her out, and we got to know each other. It continued once we both came back." "So this isn't a one-time thing?" The officer waved one hand toward the box and looked at her. "Steph, Keith is my friend. Tell him the whole story." She sighed and set her brush down as she started with her date with Eric, outlining everything she could remember up until the photos had arrived. "Then there was that." She motioned toward the photos. She couldn't even look at them, much less tell him what was in there. "Go through them. Most of them are innocent enough, in and of themselves. Creepy as hell that he has that many, but nothing sinister, but at the very bottom of the stack are a couple that were the reason I thought you might be able to help." Noah dropped one hand to her upper back and rubbed in small soothing circles. Keith leaned forward and picked up the pictures again, and flipping through them until near the back of the stack, he stopped a minute. "Is this him?" He turned the one of Steph and Noah Eric on the boat around so they could know which it was. "It's his face pasted on my body," Noah said. "I don't know how he got that photo, there was no one near us all afternoon." The officer frowned as he continued to flip through the photos. "There are several ways it could be done. A telephoto lens, maybe a drone, they're common enough these days. What about this one?" He showed them another photo. "That's me, in my apartment. Last night." Her stomach churned again. How had he gotten in while she was there, without her hearing him? "Don't turn that last one around. We don't need to see it again," Noah said as Keith started to do just that. "And no. That's not him either. That was me again. Today." His hand on her back never stopped moving and Steph was glad. She closed her eyes and focused on the feel of his touch. "I woke up about 4. Ran down to Quick Mart for coffee. The box wasn't there when I got back, but was on her doorstep when we opened the door to leave maybe 15 minutes later." "Is there any tracking or return address?" Keith reached for the box. "Were you expecting a package?" "I knew who it had to be from. Packages are delivered to the office, and you have to pick them up there." The officer stopped reaching for the box and looked at her. Really? Do they have security cameras anywhere? I have no idea. I've never thought to look. He leaned back on the couch, holding one photo. Steph wasn't sure which one. Have you reported any of this before? Yes, to Officer Creedon up at the lake. Noah convinced me to. I have his number, Noah said. I'll give it to you. All right. Keith studied the photo for a couple minutes. Noah, come here a second. Steph instantly missed his hand on her back as he left to see what his friend wanted. You see this? He was pointing out something on the photo still in his hand. Yeah. Noah frowned and bent closer to get a better look at the picture. And this? What is it? Noah leaned back and shook his head slightly. It's the perspective on the photo. Keith looked up and at Steph. Do you have a fan, light fixture, or anything else over your bed? Oh. That picture. She thought about it a second. No. I've wished for a fan several times and the lights are weird, few overhead lights, I have to keep lamps. Oh. Wait. There is a smoke alarm. She blinked and looked at Noah. I thought it was in a weird place, most are close to the door, but I stood on the bed to change the battery once. Is that the only thing above your bed? Yeah, I think so. Why? I don't think he was there for this photo. He held up the picture without turning it, so she could see it. Or for the other taken in your apartment. He watched her for a moment, she felt his eyes on her. I have no doubt he's been in your apartment. But I'm also fairly certain these are stills taken from hidden cameras. His words were like a blow to the stomach. They knocked all the air from her lungs. The idea of him in her house was unnerving, but at least it hadn't been while she was there. While she had been sleeping, or even while she was awake, and had somehow missed him. She closed her eyes a moment to try to catch her breath. Are you okay? Noah's voice was close. His hand touched her back again, and she nodded without opening her eyes. If she wasn't careful, her relief that she hadn't somehow slept through Eric breaking into her house would turn to tears, and as much as she would hate for Noah to see it, crying in front of the cops would only piss her off. After a few deep breaths, she opened her eyes and found Noah watching her with concern. Keith, on the other hand, wasn't watching her but Noah instead. She wondered what he saw that had him so intrigued. Less than an hour later, Steph had put on a pair of jeans over her pajamas, and was letting Noah and Officer Burkhart into her apartment. There had been some debate about whether she should come. She didn't want to be here, but she didn't want to be left alone at Noah's right now either. In the end, she'd stated she was going along, and only stared at Noah when he'd argued. Keith hadn't bothered, he'd wanted her there all along. Wow, the complex hasn't done anything about this yet? Keith said as they approached her door. The red paint was still bright across it. I called them, they said the air conditioning issue took priority. I get that. They're supposed to do it tomorrow. He didn't say anything else, just nodded. She opened the door and stepped inside. She moved out of the way to let the two men in, then closed and locked the door. She wasn't sure why, there was no doubt Eric knew how to get in when he wanted. Show me the bedroom where you were sleeping, the officer said. Steph sighed, she didn't want to have to go back in there, but she knew she'd have to face it sometime. Why put it off? She led him to the bedroom. Her face heated when she realized the bed was still unmade. Do you mind if I look around? No. If you think it will help, look wherever you want. Hell, go through my underwear drawer, Eric probably already has. Steph was fed up with this shit. Why don't you gather some things and come stay at my place for a couple days? At least until we can figure out where to go from here, Noah put in. Give me a few minutes to take some photos, then you can gather whatever you like, Keith said, pulling out his phone. She stood in the room where she had slept for the last year and watched a uniformed officer take pictures. It was surreal and, for a moment, felt like she was standing outside her body watching. Okay, that should do. Keith put the phone away and pulled out a pair of blue surgical gloves from his pocket. He slipped them on with an ease that only comes with practice. Steph had used them a couple times in her biology class. They weren't easy to get on. You can gather what you like now. He went toward the bed. Steph decided she didn't need to watch him, and went to the side of the closet she didn't use often, pushed the sliding door open and took out a small suitcase, setting it on the chair in the corner and opening it. Her first stop was the dresser. There, she opened her underwear drawer, and her words about Eric had probably been through it came back to her. She froze, unable to decide what to take for a moment. Noah's hand on her arm made her look up into his deep chocolate eyes. Don't let fear of him control you. Take what you want, we can run it through my washer. She shook her head at that. She was already letting her fear of him run her out of her apartment, at least for a few days. But it wasn't just fear that allowed that, it was common sense. Eric had proven he could get in whenever he wanted, so it wasn't smart to stay here alone, at least until they could get the locks changed. Besides, she wasn't going far, and she wasn't going to be gone for long. Steph looked back to the drawer and took out a half-dozen pairs, then tossed them in the suitcase before moving to the next drawer. She did the same with each drawer until she'd been through them all, then went to the side of the closet she used most, pushed both doors over to the other side, and froze. She started for a moment, anger building in her chest. You should see this, Steph spoke louder this time. What? Noah asked. What is it? Keith approached from where he'd been near the bed. That wasn't there earlier. She pointed and took a step back. What? Keith asked. The dress? Noah looked at her, then back to the frilly, ruffled teal abomination that hung in her closet. She would never willing buy, much less wear such a thing. The dress, she said. That wasn't in there before we went to eat. This may be his doing. Keith pulled out his phone again, and had to peel off one glove to operate it. He took a couple photos of the dress in the closet, then switched it over, and placed a call. He was requesting a crime scene unit. Sorry. He looked at Steph once he'd gotten off the phone. I can't let you take anything now. Steph let her shoulders fall. I'm not really surprised. If it ends up that this is enough to get rid of him, it's worth the pain in the ass this is going to be. She took a deep breath and let it out in a rush. Can we just leave, or do you need us to stay? I'm sorry, but I'm going to need you to stay. They're sending out a detective, and he's going to need to talk to you. Can I go sit in the living room at least? I don't see why not. She glanced around, then walked out. She couldn't take anything anyway. In the living room, she sat on the couch, pulled the throw off the back, and wrapped it around herself. Noah sat beside her and lifted his arm. He didn't have to say a word. She moved over against him, dragging her blanket with her. She wasn't sure why, but she was certain that as hard as this was, it would be worse without Noah.